Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, and following on from my video yesterday on the pitfalls of getting the Brexit policy right for progressive parties, mostly I'm talking about Labour, but it does apply to a lesser extent for the Greens and the Liberal Democrats as well. But this morning I'm going to be talking about proportional representation, which is arguably an even more important policy for the short term, certainly for me, but it's also a more dangerous one to get wrong. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, electoral reform. Absolutely going to be part of Labour's manifesto promises. They've already said that. And just as surely the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. In fact, the only party who benefit from the current system, in Britain at any rate, is the Conservative Party. So everyone else really should be in favour of change. And change, frankly, is better than what we have now. Any change. But proportional representation, for me, is the ideal. It's another vital policy alongside Brexit. In fact, the most vital, and surely this should be a no-brainer for other parties to adopt. But no, this one's even worse than Brexit for elephant traps in many respects. Largely what prompted me to do this video was a query on Twitter about why Labour don't push for it. Now, there are a number of reasons, but again, I'm going to try and keep it reasonably brief here. One, although Brexit is a part of the public debate, proportional representation is not. Please bear in mind that proportional representation represents an existential threat to the billionaires and the extremes of either political wing. Though by far the most organised and best resourced is the right wing. Any hint of proportional representation coming and they will fight tooth and nail. They will throw everything they have at it because it would signal their death knell if it ever succeeds. As such, before you draw this battle line, you have to know exactly what you're doing. A second reason is that if you get your position wrong, you risk the entire general election. The Conservatives will attack any leaning towards PR as some pro-European plot to replace good old-fashioned British democracy. If you don't think that this would work, consider that both the Scottish and Welsh parliaments, who are not exactly fertile grounds for the Conservatives, the billionaire press don't really hammer them very hard because they focus on really England where most people are, which was you capture England, you capture Britain basically. In the Scottish and Welsh parliaments, they still use first past the post. Yes, some seats are won via proportional representation, but most are first past the post. If you cannot persuade people in UK countries that actually tend to dislike the Conservatives and aren't impressed by their moneyed interests, if you can't persuade them to adopt full Parliament elected via proportional representation, what chance in the majority of English constituencies where they do chuck a lot of votes the Tories' way, where they are convinced by them? And so consider the general election. You have some people who realise that the Conservatives are making a mess of things. Perhaps they see Labour as more competent now at this point. At this point, you get to a point where they go, yeah, Labour, we perhaps can trust them more with the economy, with the NHS, with schools, with public transport, with law and order and so on. But I don't like this thing I've been reading about proportional representation. That sounds a bit scary to me and a bit permanent. And, and we had this big change in Brexit. I didn't like that at all. I don't really want another big national divisive debate. So they vote for the Conservatives as the lesser of two evils. Let's be really clear. Labour right now do not represent a slick communication machine. I think that's an understatement. The Conservatives do. Who would you really back in a public debate on anything, but let's say proportional representation? Who would you back to have the most penetration into the public? Especially when the Conservatives are currently in power and control much of the narrative. They've even persuaded people that the very obvious Brexit damage is caused by the pandemic, when we're also told that the pandemic isn't that bad because of the vaccine rollout. Oh yeah, the pandemic's much worse now, we're coming to the end of it. By the way, all these terrible things that are happening now, nothing to do with Brexit, but the pandemic. Logic has no power in public discourse right now. A third thing to consider is that although rejoining the EU is a fairly straightforward question, though there are variations even on that, proportional representation isn't. What form of proportional representation? Should it be a manifesto commitment so that there's no need for a referendum? But then you make the general election a referendum and that increases your chance of losing. When the chances of victory are already going to be slim, Or do you just promise a referendum, meaning that you then have to commit to a resource-hungry and divisive referendum when people are pretty sick of them in this country right now? There are 100 different PR policies that Labour could adopt, even if they were fully seized of the need for it. And you couldn't adopt it until you picked the one that is best placed to win them. And right now, none of them actually work to win them power. I've said before, I have a list of things that I want a Labour government to do. But in opposition, I want one thing. Kick the Tories out. That's it. One policy. Do nothing that doesn't maximise this one overarching policy and don't miss opportunity to do something that does. And there's a fourth issue. Polling revealed that a major complaint with the 2019 Labour manifesto was that it was promising too much and people didn't believe that Corbyn could deliver it. It was seen as a confused mass of policies. No single policy was unwelcome. No one had an issue with the policies. It was just too much. Now, in reality, most people don't really read the manifesto. So what they really mean is that the policies pushed in the campaign had this issue. Too much. Same thing now. Labour need a couple of headline policies to push for the next campaign. They have to be ones that will appeal to the swing voters and ones that they can see would mean an instant impact for the better on their lives. I'll tell you what I need Labour to do. I need Labour to see in the first 100 days, you're going to see these changes, and for those changes to be the sort of things people want to see. Don't say to them like the Conservatives will, oh yeah, at some point in the vague future we'll introduce this thing. No, in the first 100 days, you can judge us. First 100 days, you're going to get this. A constitutional change like PR wouldn't do anything to their lives for several more years. By definition, it doesn't do anything until the next election. So unless there was a huge, overwhelming level of support for it in the public, it's not the horse to back as one of your key policies to be trumpeting during an election campaign. My personal preference is for Labour to be clear about their plans for deeper devolution in order to install that immediately, and then promise a public consultation on Westminster electoral reform, including a few options. Spend the first year of power carrying that review out, but essentially use it to get people talking about proportional representation. Then debate it in Parliament. You'll have the Conservatives going, oh, you don't like the sound of that. No, I'll bet you don't. But they'll be in the minority now. And push a referendum to ask people which electoral system they prefer. Obviously, you need a transferable vote for that system, for the referendum itself, obviously. And I can't imagine that under those conditions, if you get it right, that first past the post would win. And although my preference is proportional representation, do you know what? I'll take any improvement over what we have now. The thing is, if you do it in that way, you first of all deflect any fears about a change in the system, because you're not actually talking about, you're not introducing change in the system, you're not promising to do anything. You don't even have to mention the referendum. You don't have to, just talk about the review. We're going to have a public consultation, see what the public think. If someone asks you, and they will, that if the review suggests people, you'd say, if the review suggests people are up for a change and they're happy with the way things are, that'll be fine. Nothing will change then. But if the review suggests a desire for change, well, we'll debate it in Parliament and Parliament will decide where we go from there. And if the journalists ask any further questions, just repeat those lines. Just say, oh, does that mean there'll be a referendum? That'll be up to Parliament. That'll be up to the public. The public will decide. If the public say they're happy with what we've got now, then that'll be what we do. Would you force anything on the public? No, of course not. There will always be a referendum, but we won't have I'm not committing to a referendum. We'll only have a referendum if our public consultation tells us that people want one. If they don't, we won't. After all, how can you go further before the people have been consulted? You can't say what you'll do after the consultation, because then you're basically saying the consultation will be meaningless. No. When we consult the public, unlike the Conservatives, it will mean something. Play the political game. Of course, there are other systems that people could also be in favour of. It's not like it's only PR or first past the post. There are other options. Even PR, as I say, has different forms, loads of different forms you could have. But the important points for me regarding this whole thing are as follows. There's two antagonistic points here. Firstly, pushing for a particular type of electoral reform, a detailed type, as a firm election promise, not only serves to confuse the other messages, the things you want to get out to win your votes, it risks losing votes by a population who will be afraid of sweeping change and suspicious of more referenda. As for promising to do it without a referendum, that's a real vote loser. The second thing is, that being said, it is essential that as soon as the Conservatives are kicked into opposition, they are not allowed another first past the post election. If they want to win power in the future, make them reflect the public first. So there has to be a plan to introduce change without triggering the fears that the billionaire press will unleash. Hence my preference for a public consultation, which governments can always turn to whatever they want, and you go from there. You don't commit to anything beyond that public consultation. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.